Good afternoon. Hello. Well, thank you for tearing yourself away from this gorgeous day outside. It will be totally worth it to be in here, however. And before I dive in, so I'm Jenny Chapman. I'm the Dean of the Haas School of Business. This is our Dean Speaker Series. And before I introduce our fantastic, wonderful guest, I'm just going to remind you that today is Big Give. I gave at 9:03 last night. 9:03 counted for today because I guess it's East Coast time. And we have, especially to the students, we have a bunch of matches, but one of the matches is for students. We have 30 students already. If we get 50, then we unlock a $10,000 matching gift. So any amount, it's just numbers at this point, even $5 or whatever would be fantastic. And downstairs they have donut holes, which, if you go down the stairs, maybe you burn enough calories to eat the donut hole. I don't know. But please consider that as a possibility for today. Okay, so welcome to today's Dean Speaker Series. I am so excited to introduce Julie Zhuo. So Julie is famously known as Facebook's first intern. And through her ingenuity and hard work and brilliance, she became the tech giant's VP of design, including spearheading developments like the like button and the news feeds for over 2 billion users, I'm sure many of us here. After a 14-year career at Facebook, Julie co-founded Sundial, an AI-powered analytics platform designed to help teams make better data-informed decisions. So she's right in the middle of everything that's happening in the world right now. As CEO, Julie has grown the company to become one of the leading AI-driven analytics platforms in the US. Julie is also the author of a best-selling field guide to management called The Making of a Manager. The book offers guidance on how to transform from a new manager into a strong, supportive leader. Julie also writes about technology, design, and leadership on her popular blog and mailing list, The Looking Glass. And so, Julie, we have many future founders or current founders of companies in the room, and obviously all of us are waiting with bated breath to hear about what's happening with AI. So I'm really excited about you being here today. So thank you all for coming, and thank you to Julie for joining us. Okay, so some quick housekeeping. You all have a note card on your seat. If you have questions during the conversation, please jot them down. We have our folks in the side who will pick up those cards, Sarah and Holden. So feel free to give them over to them, and we will have some time for Q&A near the end. So now I'll turn it over to our wonderful MBA students, Venkuta, Gadi, and Ima Essien, who are going to lead today's discussion. Welcome.
Thank you, Dean Chapman, and hello, everyone. My name's Ima. I'm a second-year full-time MBA student, and Julie, it's such a pleasure to be here and help host this conversation today.
Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone.
Thank you, Ima. Hi, Julie. It's wonderful to have you today. My name is Venkuta Gade. I'm an executive MBA student at Haas and a student board member of the Dean Speaker Series. On behalf of the Dean's team and everyone here, we thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us, and we're excited to learn from your journey, leadership, and your perspective on building in the AI era. I would like to get started with your journey from an early Facebook employee, like a first intern, to becoming the VP of product design, and now the co-founder of Sundial. And I would like to ask you if you have any of those one or two formative experiences that you can recall from the 13 years you have spent at Facebook that has shaped the leader and the builder that you are today?
Yeah, great question. I guess a lot of how I think about my journey is being asked or being faced with doing something that I simply felt totally unprepared to do. And I wrote about this in my book, but for example, being 25 years old, our team was scaling. I had just joined as a designer. 3 years ago, I barely even knew what design was as like a function because I'd been trained as an engineer. And then at 25, I was asked to manage half of the team. And so that to me is like one of those moments where you're just like, well, I have like, okay, yes. But meanwhile, having absolutely no idea and no confidence in myself that I could actually do the job. And I think about that a lot because at Facebook, I had the opportunity to be part of this hyperscaling journey. And it was, the company that I joined even a year or 2 or 3 late after when I joined was like a completely different company. Because when I started, Facebook was a college networking site. So everybody there, we were all college students. We had used the product in college, but yet it was like a company with a very grand ambitions to try and scale to 1 billion users. And you can imagine a bunch of us, again, very similar to everyone sitting here, like it's just a bunch of kids. And we're like, okay, cool, let's do this. Like, let's figure out how to get to 1 billion users. And every part of that was unknown. Like, it wasn't like we had a lot of experienced people who knew how to do this, right? It was just like having to figure it out and reinvent and do it on our own. And I think that's probably the most durable lesson that I have from thinking back. It's like times are always changing. Change is the only constant that we have. I think that's more true now than ever, especially with what we're seeing with AI and the acceleration of that change. So no one really has a playbook for how we're supposed to deal with that and what we're supposed to go and all of the ways and the advice and all of that people say, including mine. I think you should take it all with a grain of salt because frankly, nobody really has the answer. But it is up to all of us to be able to recognize that and then still say yes regardless, right? Still say yes to opportunities, still say yes to trying things, still feel like, okay, yes, I may not know what's going on and I may feel like a total imposter and not have any conviction, but that is the journey that we have ahead of us.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that insight.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I think in everything that you've named, those experiences have continued to help you shape how you think and how you're building over time. And so we also wanted to know, in that reinvention, what ultimately motivated you to start Sundial?
So I had about a 14-year journey at Facebook, which was incredible. It's now called Meta, but in my head, it's still Facebook. That's how you can date my period there. And it was incredible. I always joke that I learned everything I learned about like product development and management and people. Like, it was very much shaped there. And I think I was with that company for so long because it was very aligned with my values. But at the same time, after 14 years and having worked in social media and problems of communication and all of that, I also felt like the world was big and bigger than that. And so I think you could, maybe the feeling that I had was like, I kind of felt like I grew up there, just like many of you, we all grew up somewhere, and like maybe you love the place that you grew up, maybe you love your family, your friends, but just like before you make a big decision to go to college or to take the next step in your journey, part of that feeling was like, there's still this world of possibility. There's still so much to learn. Like, the world is big. And that was what I had. I could very easily have continued with Facebook for the rest of my time there. Like, it was very comfortable and it was amazing, but I felt that I wanted to learn and see a lot of other things as well. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I just knew that it was probably going to be something different. Like, I wanted to explore more of like what else was going on in Silicon Valley, what were like other interesting problems out there. And what was great is that I was able to actually take a year to do consulting. And when you don't know what you want to do and you just want to explore, I think consulting is a great option because it exposes you to so many different types of problems and opportunities. And so I worked with one of my dear friends from my time at Facebook. His name's Chandra, and he used to lead analytics for Facebook, for Instagram, and he went to Sequoia Capital. He was their chief data officer. So he was somebody that I just absolutely adored and learned so much from. And he was very different from me. I worked on the design side and he's on data. And, you joke that like left brain, right brain, like see the world from very different perspectives. But that was also part of what I wanted, was to be with him and learn from him. And so together we went and did a bunch of strategy, product, and growth consulting for various Silicon Valley companies. And that was when I was exposed to just like, whoa, like I'd only ever seen how one company culture worked, and that was at Facebook. And this gave me the opportunity to see how other groups of people were coming up with innovative ideas, how they were organized, how they thought about making decisions. And one thing that Chandra and I quickly realized is that one of the strengths of Facebook was that it was extremely aligned to this idea of trying to understand the truth and what was really going on with customers. And when you have billions of users, you can't just rely on talking to a handful of them, right? Obviously, we were all Facebook users ourselves within the company, but very quickly we realized that we were not representative of the broader user base that we had. We were, when I first joined, again, college students, we were all college students. We had a very good, I would say, knack for understanding what college students like us wanted. But as the service scaled, we started to realize that our own intuitions about what the user base wanted was more and more out of date. Because as the user base grew, there were many other people in the world who were all over, right? Geographically, everywhere. They weren't all super high tech. We had people at different phases of maturity and their understanding of how to use like mobile phones and various other things. And so the way that we learned to get more rigorous about what should we build was to rely on data. And so I would say that Meta today is still operationally one of the best companies when it comes to understanding its user base from looking at data. And data plays a very strategic role in it's not just there to like validate an opinion. It's like, oh, well, let me get some data because I want to convince you of like what I'm trying to say. It was actually a very truth-seeking type of culture where, you go in and like a scientist, you have a hypothesis, but then you're trying to actually see if the data will confirm or not, right, for your hypothesis. And if so, then you'll go and actually try something else. And everything was very experiment based. And when we went and we looked at a lot of other companies and they asked us for help, they wanted to know, like, how can we grow like Facebook? How do we get so rigorous in our operations that we can succeed? And our answer was always, it's grounded in our understanding of data and reality. And many other companies just were much less sophisticated in how they use data. So that was a lot of what we were helping them with. And then out of that, we realized that there's ways to automate what we were doing and that we could actually productize. I always joke that what we're trying to do with Sundial is take my co-founder Chandra's brain and like productize it, like take a lot of the art that comes from having done this for years and years and marry it with, of course, the latest in what we can do with AI and with, computation and to deliver insights to every single person who makes decisions. Because what we want at the end of the day is how do we make better, faster decisions? And I think having we will never have perfect information. I think Jeff Bezos famously says this, like if you're waiting for data just at the point in which you're like 95% confident, you're probably moving too slowly. And I very much agree with that. But even still, if you were going to make a decision with like 30% understanding and we can bump that to like 50 or 60% understanding of what's going on, then you will likely over the long run be able to make higher quality decisions.
That's very inspiring. And I want to touch on the experimentation part and the seeking for change and exploration, which is, throughout seen in your journey. And I want you to talk about the transition from, being an advisory role to a number of fast scaling companies and to actually starting a company, which is like Sundial. What made you think that, from the role of where you were advising a number of companies in the consultant role you mentioned to starting the company and building a product of your own like Sundial, what made you actually make the transition?
This is a great question. So when I remember actually being in the audience. I went to Stanford, and one of the programs that they had is a Mayfield Fellows program, which is for entrepreneurship. And I know Berkeley has something similar. It's like we have kind of the sister relationship. So when I was an undergrad, this was like my first taste of this idea of entrepreneurship. I grew up in Houston. I didn't really have that deep of an understanding of what Silicon Valley was. I didn't know about startups. I didn't know about venture. I didn't really understand that ecosystem when I moved to the Bay Area. And this class really opened my eyes to this notion of like, all of these companies that you hear about, like, well, it actually started with like two people and an idea, and they're like in a garage, and they were just like trying some stuff out. And I thought that that was just the coolest thing ever. That all of these, large institutions that seem like they've been there forever always had a starting point. And the starting point is like one or two people in a room just dreaming and then doing things. And then, this idea of like compounding, right? Which is like this belief I have, which is that you can, we can do much less in a day or a week than we expect, but we can do far more in a year or in 10 years. And I think this is a bias that human minds have in terms of how we think about what can be accomplished. And so this notion of like, you start with something and then little by little, if you just build upon it, you can build something large and impactful and vast. That was what got me interested in the idea of startups. And so once that idea was in my head, I was like, well, I don't know that I'm brave enough to start a company, but I certainly want to work at a startup. And I think that's what led me to going to Facebook at that point in time when it was about 100 people. And then I got to really live that experience from, growing from 100 to like tens of thousands and seeing that journey. But I always knew that I wanted to go back and see if all these things I learned could be distilled down into like, can I take all these lessons that I've learned throughout my career, but still go back to the beginning point, which is just ideas, a partner, and then see what we can make out of that. So to me, it's really been about the journey. I am a person who loves to learn, and having gone through that so many times of like going back and being an imposter, and then realizing I could grow, and then going back to being an imposter again, and then realizing I could grow. I'd gotten used to that idea, or maybe started to see it as like, that's the price. Like the price for growth is always going to be that we have to be uncomfortable. We always say that we want to grow, we want to learn, we want great things, but there is a price to pay. And that is like, you have to go back to the beginning often, and you have to go back and be a beginner again. And you have to be okay with being like the dumbest person in the room, or the person who has the least experience, or the person who doesn't know the answer. But take a bet on yourself. And know that you can learn, you can grow, you can spend the cycles to try, you can make a bunch of experiments. Many of them will fail, but the ones that succeed are the ones that you can double down on, and you can continue to grow in that direction. So I think all of those were like very much in me, and I was like, I gotta go and do this. Like I wanna take this problem that I find so interesting, which is how do you help organizations and individuals make better, faster decisions, and figure out like, how do we really do that? How do we decompose it? What does it look like? How will it feel in the form of a product? How will people use it in their workflow? I just think these are really interesting questions.
It's fascinating to see all the journey, like from a large organization to consultant role, and then advising role, and then to a startup role. That's fascinating, and thank you for sharing that insight.
Yeah, it's really encouraging to hear how you've incrementally built conviction over the years as you've gone through these different phases. And so I'm assuming many people in this room are thinking about starting their own companies someday. And so for any students that are thinking about entrepreneurship, how do you make decisions in these really early stage environments when there isn't enough data to rely on? How would you help understand when is the right time to move also from that analysis to acting on it?
I think right now is honestly one of the best times to go and start a company. The tools are there. We can individually do so much more than we ever could before with the tools that are available. Maybe you didn't know how to code, but now with Claude, you can still build incredible things. Maybe you didn't know about this domain. Well, LLMs are really great at giving you access to all of the information and doing the kind of deep analysis that's necessary to give yourself, again, the context to be able to build stuff. So I think it's a fabulous time. I think very early on, the thing that I think has always helped me is like, you got to fall in love with a problem, not a solution. Solutions come and go. Problems are... They're like forever in some ways, right? That means what I mean to say is that there's always going to be a new problem that comes up. And personally, I think the most interesting things to work on are the ones where the problem feels somewhat universal. So put another way, right? Sometimes people look at me and say like, oh, Julie, are you building like a dashboarding product? Are you trying to solve dashboarding? And dashboarding is an okay problem, but it's not really a problem, right? Like it's sort of more of like a solution to a problem. The problem has always been, how do people get access to information that helps them make decisions? And when you frame it like that, you're like, okay, well, dashboarding is a solution, but there may be many others. And as technology improves, we should expect that the shape of the solution will be different, right? Dashboarding was like, I think, the best thing to solve the problem. I mean, I guess in the very beginning, and the thing that people always did is like you maybe hire other humans, and then those humans can do, a deep amount of analysis, whether it's with spreadsheets or with whatnot. And then dashboards came, and suddenly a person who maybe didn't want to spend all their time writing SQL queries or doing analysis in Excel can like use the dashboard to get insights. But again, that was 20 years ago. That was a huge innovation. But to sort of say that like I'm here in the dashboard or analytics space is a little bit, I think, too narrow. The problem has always been about human decision making, and like that's a forever problem. Like I don't think any product or tool is going to solve the problem of like how do we make perfect decisions in the face of the fact that we don't like uncertainty and wish we could control the future, right? Nothing will likely ever solve that. I think this was true at Facebook as well. What I always loved about it is that it wasn't like, oh, we're a social network, let's build ourselves a social network. It was like, the problem is about how do people feel close and connected, with all of the other human beings in the earth or with the people closest to them. And that is a forever problem. Like it's not like Facebook or any app has solved it. Technology has brought us closer. It's better now that we have telephones instead of having to write letters to one another. It's better now that we have FaceTime than telephones. It's better that we have an ability to message anyone and any part of the world instantaneously. But I don't know that the problem of human connection will really ever be solved. And that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes like a company be able to be durable, because things will change, but the problem will remain. And so one of the things that I would advise to anybody starting out is like, is there a problem that you really love, that you find yourself just really captivated by, that you would think about even in your days off, or you're in a shower, or you're doing, walking between two places. And if you can fall in love with the problem, then don't attach too much to the solution. The solution will change, and that is okay. And what you need to do is be very experimental. You have a problem. Okay, maybe you have the first solution. Maybe you have, again, and the solution can often be framed as a hypothesis. You have a particular thesis about what is a good way to solve that problem. And then the thing to do is, how will you validate that hypothesis as quickly as possible? And usually what that looks like is you got to talk to people. You just got to talk to the people who are who very deeply feel that problem, or the ones who are trying to make do with some other solution to the problem, and understand through their lens, through their perspective, like what can you know, how can you understand this problem more deeply? How can you understand what people are doing today? And I have found that whenever I feel stuck, right, whenever I'm like, I don't know, because most of the time I don't know, or I don't have like that strong of like, yes, 100% this solution will work. I rarely feel that way. But often just talking to prospective customers or prospective users or prospective buyers, and just hearing them talk about the problem and what they do around it and what's important and what's not important, and then engaging in it. Like, oh, well, what if you did this, or what if you did that? Or imagine a world in which, this thing existed. Would that solve your problem? And that type of dialogue is often what helps me build more understanding, and therefore greater, either more hypotheses or greater conviction in a particular hypothesis.
Awesome. Julie, a lot of what you're describing, which is making decisions with imperfect information and learning as you go. Sorry about that. Learning as you go is something many people connect with you in your book, The Making of a Manager. So when you reflect on it, how has your thinking evolved in today's AI era, and what remains essential in management?
Yeah, I joke that I should write a follow-up that's called The Making of an Agent Manager, because there actually are so many parallels between managing people and managing agents. I think the most important one, and so in the book, I talk about this framework of like, I think as a manager, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get better outcomes from a group of people. And that's what the job of management is to sort of think about yourself as, what can you do that would be like a multiplier effect for this group of people getting to the outcome that you want? And I break it down into 3 key levers. So the first is, well, what is the purpose? And so when you have a group of people doing work, if people are not aligned on what success looks like and what we're really trying to do together, and what is like, let's say, a mediocre job versus an excellent job versus like a bad job, then you end up kind of having like people on a boat, but they're all kind of rowing in slightly different directions, or they're kind of not doing it in cadence. So purpose is really, really important. And I think this is probably the most critical thing today when thinking about working with LLMs as agents, because if you're not very clear about what is the outcome that we're trying to get and spell it out, talk about, again, what is an excellent job versus like a pretty good job versus an okay job, then you're going to get very mixed results. And so the clarity and definition of what we're really trying to go after, I think, is of utmost importance. And it's what's true whether you're working with a group of people, and it's definitely true when you're working with like a bunch of LLMs. And it sounds very obvious, but I actually think this is the hardest part. The hardest part is often figuring out what actually matters, because what happens is that our minds, it's very active, and again, I'm sure many people here, like, you guys are great problem solvers. So often what happens is that, there's a problem, there's like all these different solutions that are already coming to mind, right? Probably at different phases. And so what can happen is that you can get attached to maybe a particular outcome or a subvariant, or again, you start to think about what to do as in terms of like the solution, rather than going back to, here's the problem. What truly will prove to you that this problem has been solved? What is the outcome that we want? And there's no shortcut to this. I think that often you just have to sit with yourself. And it goes back to like, the more information you have, the more you talk to customers, the better it becomes clear to you what great looks like. But having that clarity and having that North Star center everything is really critical for us to get the best outcomes from either a group of people or a group of, or using a number of agents or a fleet of agents. I think the second thing that I talk about as a lever is process, which is sort of like, how do we do the work? And I think this is also quite relevant, whether for humans or for LLMs, which goes back to like, well, like, if with LLMs, this often comes as like, what tools will you give it? What skills will you give it? What context will you give it in terms of, if you're trying to ask an LLM to produce an essay or analysis or an email, a lot of like the how goes back to, well, what should the style be? And, do you want like very formal prose, like a research paper? Do you want like a casual tone, like you're writing, a text message to somebody? But the how and defining the appropriate context and the, what should you use to accomplish this job, to get to the outcome, is also really important for us to define, whether with humans or with agents. The third lever that I talk about is people. And this one is probably the most different between humans and with agents. I think a lot of times when you're dealing with a group of people, and again, this doesn't change because humans are humans, right? Even as technology changes, human relationships, like, each of us we're still unique. We still have things that we desire. We have hopes, we have dreams. We're not perfect. We make mistakes. We have emotions and feelings. And a lot of, I think, managing and dealing with people is about trying to see more clearly who is it, right? And it means seeing myself clearly, like when I'm engaging in this interaction, what is my state of mind? Like, what am I wanting? Like, what is, and a lot of this is unconscious, but it's like, if we can make it conscious, we can often do a better job of trying to focus on the outcome together. I think it's true for working with people. Like, we kind of have to understand, what does other human care about? What's important to them? What are they trying to get at? What is their state of mind right now? I think with LLMs, this becomes obviously much less important and relevant, but I still think some aspects matter, because like even today, we have multiple different choices for the LLMs that we work with, and they're all kind of different, right? Like the way that Claude Opus works is a little bit different than if you're using, OpenAI or Gemini. And so even with these agents, they have their unique personalities. They have things that they're better at and worse at. And it's kind of like when you work with humans, that's true for all of us. Like, we have strengths, we have weaknesses. And oftentimes you don't get to know that unless you put in the reps. So for example, we're going to work together. We're probably like, in, let's say, the first hour of working together, I'll just take you at your word for it, and I might not know you, and we'll, exchange information about ourselves. But if you imagine we work together for 100 hours, I start to notice the nuances. Like we build the context. Exactly, right? And same with, you do that for me, I do that for you, but we start to understand, like in these situations, like you have great strengths in these areas, you know a lot about this, or your style works really well for this type of customer or this type of personality. And I think that type of learning we need to do as well for the agents, because they're not all the same. Right? They might on the surface seem similar, the way that like two humans may look very similar. But if you really want to understand how to leverage everyone and have people or agents do their best work, we need to understand the nuances. And that comes from a lot of repeated interactions and a lot of working on problems together.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much. And we look forward to the making of an agent manager. And I just wanted to add, right, to what you said, the people, process, and the product, the 3P. What's also unique about what you mentioned is the work is right now augmented, or we have individuals whose work is augmented or kind of enhanced by AI, and that becomes the challenge. And then you actually put it well. The fundamentals don't change, right? The processes and the people perspective should remain the same. Thank you for that.
And it's helpful because we actually want to know how has your management style changed as a result of that, and what your team has been able to produce and what has become more important.
Yeah, for me too, I'm trying to be a lot more hands-on. And so often in the past where I would have said, hey guys, this is the goal, let me find the right person to work on it and take it through. A lot of cases now, I ask myself, well, do I have to actually bother another human being with this and interrupt their flow, or can I just actually figure out how to do it myself? And so for more and more, I'm trying to figure out, is there a way that I can leverage the tools and the technology available and figure out how to do this? So I personally try to, roll up my sleeves and get in there and be a builder. I think that is the, I feel like in the past, especially again, working with large groups of people, you kind of have to have some layers of coordination and management, right? And I use the word manager liberally. I don't always mean the boss, but I mean even product manager or somebody whose job it is to coordinate the work of other people. I just feel like that is getting less and less important because individuals, an individual human can do so much more now with these tools that we have at disposal. And so coordination takes time. Again, you have to align people on process and purpose and so forth, right? And if you go to large companies, I'm sure many of you have interned at large companies, a lot of time is spent aligning. There's alignment meetings because people are cool, we have to go and make sure we're marching in the same direction. I think what the teams of the future will look like is that they're just much smaller. You don't need to align that many people. It's just much easier to get 2 people on the same page as you than to get 20 people on the same page as you. And if the 2 people can do what initially you needed 20 people to do, then awesome, then great. We can do a lot more things, ideally, right? I still believe that there's, again, infinite problems. So hopefully what that looks like is not that, companies or work gets necessarily less and less. It's just that now we can tackle many more things in parallel, but the group that's tackling it is smaller, needs less coordination, but each individual is going to be expected to execute and take care of a lot more because you don't have to go through as many layers of people to get stuff done.
Awesome. And as we begin to wrap up, I wish we had more time, but as we begin to wrap up, I would love to bring the conversation back to the room where many of us are balancing careers, families, and school, and wondering about how better we should be prepared for, and regardless of the technological shifts. And if you could share one belief about either leadership or product building that you have changed your mind over the last 5 years, that you would want the audience to understand.
This is interesting because I've spent a lot of time thinking about what does this mean for all of us? What are our jobs going to be? It's clearly changing so rapidly. And again, all of the old playbooks of the past, I don't think are that relevant. One way to look at it is that, we've been, you could say, we used to be the dominant species in the world in terms of like our intelligence and our ability to problem solve. And little by little, the machines that we have built are becoming more and more competitive with us, right? And even again, with calculators many decades ago, they were able to solve math problems faster than us. And then eventually, they started to do video games and chess and Go. And then now recently with LLMs, like many of them will write better than us or do research, and they're tireless. And there's, and you can have many more of them working at all hours on the problems of our world. But I think the thing that still makes us very human are a couple of things. The first is we get to define what really matters. We get to define the purpose, what does it all mean, and what are we trying to do, and what problems are worth solving, and what does a good life look like. That can never be taken away by any type of machines that we build. And so I think about that a lot, like just spending time aligning on like what matters and what is what is the purpose of it all. I think that is timeless and important. I think the second thing is just the fact that change is happening, and it's happening more rapidly. And so what does that mean for us? Well, we are still flesh and blood creatures, and we have feelings and uncertainty and anxieties and all of that. I think when I think about my children, who are 11, 9, and 6, I often think about like the most important skill I feel like I can help them with is emotional resilience. In a lot of ways, right? Because how can you still stay resilient in the face of change, uncertainty, likely a lot of big surprises, things that might feel like big or overwhelming? Even just the noise and the fact that we have access to so much information can feel extremely noisy and overwhelming, right? But emotional resilience and our understanding of the fact that, look, we still feel, we're not going to be robots. We are still going to have the feelings that we have and the emotions that we have. So, and that's not going to go away, but then how do we better understand ourselves? How do we give ourselves what we need? How do we become more and more resilient through investing in the self? I think these things are also very timeless and likely more important now than ever.
Thank you so much. That's very useful.
Yeah, that's incredibly helpful for everyone in the room who's still thinking about their paths that they want to take, and just the importance of localizing yourself in general and remaining steadfast as you find your way. So we like to end all our Dean Speaker Series guests or ask them this question to understand what matters most to them. If you had an extra week in your life right now with no specific responsibilities or obligations, what would you do with that time and why?
Right now, so my husband just went on a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat, and it was extremely transformative for him. So right at this moment, I'm like, man, I wish I could do that. Just go off in the woods and just sit by myself and I feel like we often don't have the luxury of doing so. Like life feels so busy. So that sounds pretty good right about now.
Thank you so much.
So much.
Well, you're the CEO of a company. You have 3 youngish children. Some time in the woods alone sounds like it would be divine. So I have some really fantastic questions here. I'm not sure I'm going to get to all of them, but they're all really great. So here's one. Now that you're in a smaller environment, what do you feel you might have taken for granted about working at a large company?
A lot of things. I mean, again, there's so much operations details that have to happen. So for example, billing, finance, contracts, employment. And so I think one of the joys, but also one of the things that probably can feel overwhelming when you're going back to starting something on your own is like, there's just no one else. You just don't have that many other people that, you don't have like a department that can deal with that and has the expertise with that. And so for me, actually, this is why I like working with ChatGPT or Claude has been, so helpful, because it's like if I get a contract and I don't really have the ability and I don't want to give it to my lawyer because it's going to be really expensive and it's going to take time, just being able to actually ask, again, trust a person who knows, or a body that knows a lot more than me is super valuable. So that is one thing. It's just knowing that you kind of have to do it on your own. But again, now the tools are better and easier for us to do it.
Great. And this is from the same person. Our students study a lot about decision making. And so this is a really great sort of basic question. What constitutes a high quality decision? How do you define it?
Oh, great question. I think a high quality decision is one that matches the outcome that you hope to have. So again, it goes back to if we're running companies, well, what do we really care about? Well, we care that customers are happy. We care that revenue is growing. And so usually we have some specific, let's call it fantasy or outcome in mind. A good decision is one that matches our intent for the outcome that we want to have. Now, again, a lot of times it's lagging, right? I'll make a decision today. We should build feature X. In my mind, I'm assuming that if I do so, it will be better for sales. More customers will want to buy our product because it has feature X. Or existing customers may find our product more valuable and get more value out of it because of feature X. So we embark on a journey to do feature X. It takes us like a couple months to build. We get the results. So by the time that I get the result, it's like way later. But a high quality decision would be like, I was right. Feature X really helped us improve sales. It improved, customer love of our product. And so that would be a high quality decision. I think the other thing with high quality is like,
You're defining high quality by the outcome.
yeah, the thing that we wanted to happen ultimately happened. That's a lagging indicator. I think if you look for like, well, what's an immediate indicator, it would feel like the process that we took to make the decision was trustworthy, right? So this is the thing that we can kind of understand in the short term. So in the long run, you have to look at the outcome because like the decision was supposed to make something happen. Did the thing happen or not? In the short term, if you're just like, I don't know, like we're both making decisions, which of our decisions is higher quality? Often the way that we would evaluate is like, which process seems more rigorous? So if like, one person says, I woke up and I just had a feeling we should do A. And the second person's like, well, I sat down, I thought about what are all the assumptions that we would need, and then I validated each one of them. I pulled the market data. Here's like my entire analysis. By the way, I think we should do B. Probably most of us would trust that B was a higher quality process. Again, the end result would still be in a perfect world. You can run a simulation, you do A, you do B, you get the results, you figure out which one actually mattered for your outcome. But because we don't live in the perfect world, often a proxy would be like, what is the quality of the decision? But the quality of the decision process has to also be, you kind of have to juggle it along with like speed. Right, because if we're like, okay, well, let's run this great process to make this decision, but that's going to take us 2 months. And by that point, the decision is no longer relevant because, I don't know, market competitions came along, somebody else did it. By that point, it might be, this goes back to the Jeff Bezos quote I was saying earlier, right? Like you kind of don't want to also have a perfect process, but then move too slowly because at that point, you've already lost a lot of the timing opportunity.
Great. So I'm sure you've gotten this question many times in your career. Can you discuss some of the ethical considerations that went into design decisions at Meta?
Yeah, I think that, it's kind of a vague question, but what I will say is that often when we think about ethics, I think what we look at is, like, it goes back to that, what I was saying earlier about like when you look at purpose and clarity of purpose, it's this question of like what really matters. Like what are the values that we want to optimize for when we make decisions? And every single company has them, right? And every single human has them. You can sort of argue that we all have our own set of values. It consciously or unconsciously drives us to the actions that we take. I think it is very difficult for any group of people all over the world to align on exactly what are the values. We might see the world differently, but I think the important part is that we're intentional. And so what I think about like a company operating well, it's, they may have a set of values and like they may actually be strongly held with them, and maybe they don't quite align with like my personal set of values or what I think, and that will be the case because the world is complex. Human beings are multifaceted. There's no such thing as like one true set of values that is better or worse than another set of values. But I do think that what we can do is make sure that if we're going to run a company or a group of people, that whatever micro decisions are being made, does that seem aligned with the greater values of the company. And that's also very hard because once you have a very large group of people, right? And again, everyone has their own sub-goals. And ideally the sub-goals will ladder into the kind of, the core values or the core goals. But that's often where sometimes like it can be difficult to create that alignment.
I'm guessing the undertone of this question has to do with kind of unintended harm or collateral damage from, what appear to be really rational decisions, like even thinking about the like button, which, has been fantastic in so many ways, and also has, teenagers losing their minds or whatever, right? So I don't know, anything to that part of it? I'm going beyond the question here, so.
I think that for me as a designer, what really matters is like we go through a very intentional process. So, when we were designing the like button, we thought about like, okay, what's the best case scenario? But we also tried to think about like, what is the worst case scenario? Like, how would people misinterpret it? And actually, we scrapped a lot of ideas. One of the most common things that people would ask us for was like a dislike button. Actually, after the like button came out, like this was like one of the number one requests. It's always like number one or number two on like every survey. Like, what can make Facebook better? A dislike button. You guys have a like button, yeah? And that's an example of where of like a decision where we really thought about that. We're like, okay, people are saying they want that, but like, how will it be interpreted? Like if I post something and then a bunch of people dislike it, like how might I feel? Like, and we just ultimately realized that there's so many instances where it might be misinterpreted in a way that probably did not make the world feel more close and connected. We ended up pivoting to kind of reactions, which felt a little bit more neutral because they were more about like expressing an emotion rather than an outright dislike. But that's an example of where like we tried to sit down and we like thought about things. Now, for sure, we get things wrong.
Yeah,
100%, and that's true for I think any decision that we make as human beings, right? Like there's the plus side of it, and there's probably some ramifications that we were not aware of. I think the best thing we can do is look at the data and like open ourselves up to the idea that we might be wrong. Yeah. So we have a hypothesis, we think this is going to do this. Are we measuring whether, what the possible downsides are? And if we learn that it's actually very different than what we expected, can we mitigate? Can we change? And I think that type of process is one that I believe in. I don't personally believe that there will be any decision that can be made by me or anyone else that will somehow be like 100%, like known, like there's 100% certainty on what will happen, or 100% like it will be good for every single person out there, right? There's no way that it will actually have a negative impact on the world. But the process of how we engage with it according to our values is like, I believe in truth seeking. I believe that like, look, assume that we're going to be wrong a lot. Are we still going out there and calibrating against reality? And even if we are wrong, which will happen, is there a way for us to continue to repair or somehow mitigate and make better?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very powerful answer, really. Thank you. Okay, so we have two questions that pertain to making decisions at a task level about deploying AI or something else. So I'm gonna read both of them and you figure out sort of how you want to answer. So one is, how should leaders think about integrating AI into their team without losing creativity or critical thinking? That's one. And then this one, for a given task, how do you decide between delegating to AI agents versus coaching and investing in a more junior direct report to enable them to get the job done?
So the first question was around how do we ensure that we're still being creative and critical thinking? I still think right now this may not be true like in 3 or 5 years. I don't know. Like I don't have any better information about when AGI is going to get here than everyone else on the internet. But at this point in time, I think you guys will all agree with me that AI does not outperform the people who are the best at a particular craft. right? So it's not writing better than Shakespeare or Hemingway. It's not doing coding better than perhaps and making judgment calls better than like the absolute best engineers out there. So that means that there still is a difference in, let's call it taste. I call this taste, or let's call it sight or vision, between people who are really, really good, who are like the true masters of a particular craft, compared to where AI is. And that still matters. Like, to me, that's still the competitive advantage. The two competitive advantages of humans is, like, number one, that's still true. Again, it may not be for a long time or in some time, but it still is true today. And the second is going back to what I said before about, like, what is the purpose? Like, what are we really trying to do, right? These two things still, I think, create a bunch of opportunity for us to apply our critical thinking, our judgment, and our creativity. Because we still have to start with, like, what does great look like? And again, you can work with the AI, but it's still at the point in which you're asking it to generate ideas for you. You still have to be a curator, ultimately, right? I think the people who direct and ultimately make decisions, which right now are still humans, are the curators of what a brilliant outcome is going to be. And to imagine that is still, I think, a very creative endeavor. It's an endeavor where we still are taking into account what is it that we know and believe to be better or truer than what the AI comes up with. And so I think that that's very important. It does, it goes back to, like, I think you have to know at an individual level, like, what is it that, it goes back to, like, the clearer you are on, like, what does that outcome look like that I care about? What's that purpose? What does amazing feel and look like? Then the better you're going to be able to leverage these tools to get to that outcome. But if you're sort of fuzzy, then that, and I feel that for myself, sometimes when I'm, like, a little bit less fuzzy about really what it is I want, I start, like, talking to the AI, and then I just felt like I'm like a leaf that's, like, blown in the wind. I get, like, I get very reactive to, like, what it's telling me. But if I can center and be like, okay, no, this is what I'm trying to do, this is what great looks like, then I'm actually utilizing my own agency and my own creativity and my own critical thinking. And then, this thing right here is what it is. It's like a tool. It's something that's meant to augment and help me, but I'm not sort of flipping the kind of, like, who's really in charge here.
Well, and I wrote down so many of the things that you said, but one of them is we still are defining what matters. I think that's a very good sort of grounding mantra. Okay, here's an interesting one.
I missed part of the question. There was a second part.
When do you decide to use a human versus an AI? I think that's kind of the gist of the question. There's something about hierarchy in here, but I'm not
Yeah, this is a tough one for me, because I think, we just did this experiment at our company where we took some of our senior-most people, and a lot of what they were spending their time on was giving context and sort of directing the work of others, often who were, newer to the company or more junior. And we said, let's do an experiment where these senior folks just actually don't do any meetings at all and don't even meet with other human beings and just focus on building. What will happen?
Experiment, yeah.
And they just got so much more done. Like, so much more productivity happened. Like, we were able to move so much faster. Like, projects that in the past had these timelines of, like, it's going to take us 2 months, like, just got done in a week or two. And so the short term of this is like, well, I don't think it actually makes as much sense for us as a company to, like, if that's true, we should really have our leads spend more time building, because that's how they will, create greater impact. Because again, they have the vision, they have the context, they have all, like, what does good look like in their mind. But they were spending a lot of time trying to translate it to humans, and then humans would do the work, and then they would evaluate the work, and they'd be like, oh, not quite that, or do something differently. And that just wasn't a really efficient process for, if the ultimate goal is, like, how do we, produce against our roadmap or our goals or our customers as quickly as possible. And so we've had to actually, change a lot of how our teams operated. Like, we have this new thing now, which is, like, no more than 2-person teams. And that way it kind of cuts down on context. We have this version of, like, hey, alignment used to be, hey, we have, like, let's say we're all trying to solve this problem. And, I have an idea, you have an idea, you have an idea, right? And so what we would do is we'd get together and be like, well, let's talk about which idea we should do. And then that would take an hour or more. But now it's like, well, what if I just build my idea and you build your idea and you build your idea, and then we'll like see the results of the idea, and that will be easier for us to vet out which idea is actually better. So we're trying to move more in that model. I do think what it means is that for junior or more younger people, what we're asking for in our team is that you kind of have to be able to operate independently. If you're sitting around and you need a lot of somebody else to direct you or guide you, then it just doesn't really make sense in the model that we have going forward, right? It's okay, like, I mean, again, I think I read this survey where they looked at a bunch of different companies and like which people were the fastest to adopt AI. And it wasn't like, oh, it's always the senior most people who are the best. In fact, a lot of times senior people or people who are too experienced, you can get very attached to your ways of working, and it's actually harder for them to be nimble and flexible to changing their workflow completely with a new tool, right? But I think, again, the disadvantage if you're very early in your career or you're new to a company is you don't have the context. You don't necessarily have that. And so I think it's not like one is always going to be better. I think at the end of the day, it's people who are able to be independent, who can just make things happen and not wait around for direction, because the ability for people to give direction is getting that is just, it's not like the ROI for the time is not quite there. But that doesn't mean there's no way to learn. I think if you're in a company, and I've seen this with some of our younger employees, like now they're like, wait, I don't have to ask the senior engineer this question. I could just like have Claude be in our code base and just like use that to teach me and give me context about what is going on. There's tons of documentation that often is written, right? There's like huge archives of either Slack messages or email messages, and like a lot of the context lives in there. But a lot of times people are like, well, it's easier for me to just talk to someone rather than like have to troll that. But now you can actually build tools to get that context that you need. So I don't mean to say that I think that, oh, it's totally game over for a person who doesn't have that. I just think you have to be scrappy and independent, figure out how you can get all the things that you need and still just try to get out there, like build something, deliver something. I think it is the people who are like, wait a second, I can't do anything unless somebody else comes and guides and tells me what to do. I think that type of attitude or that mentality, that's going to probably be harder.
Yeah. Fascinating. So this is more a question about your sort of working style. The person thanks you for coming and sharing your wisdom. And they say, you've been working hard, you still find time to share knowledge through books and blogs and visits. Could you please share with us how you manage your time and what are your priorities right now?
I have to confess that most days I wake up and I'm just like, oh my gosh, how should I spend my time today? Because it is not like, I feel like every day, I don't know, I wake up and it must feel like I'm a beginner, and there's like so many options. Like sometimes, even something as simple as, hey, I have to go and, respond to this email, right? Now I have this question of like, okay, should I respond to the email? And again, I can use AI to do that. Or should I create a system by which this type of email or this type of response should just be automated going forward? And like, I struggle with that decision. Like, I'm not kidding. Like these things constantly are in my mind. So I don't know that I have a great answer here. I think that like anyone here in this room, I'm just trying things and trying to figure it out. I do think that for me, at least, sitting down and having moments of reflection, right? Because, even this for me is like a moment of reflection. Like I get asked these very interesting questions. I kind of have to think a little bit about that. Or when I sit down and I journal or I blog, to me, these are moments of reflection where I can actually take a pause and like look at what I've been doing and see if there's patterns to extract. And all the better if like other people can find some value and we can all kind of commiserate or be in this shared experience together. But really it helps me, like it helps give me a little bit of that moment of reflection. So I do value that. I still try to find moments where I can do that type of like look backwards and synthesize a little bit and just figure out if there's any patterns that are useful to carry going forward. But actually day by day, it's just a lot of experimenting.
Sometimes I don't know what I think until I hear what I say. Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation, so filled with profound insight and just helpful guidance. I think our students have found it very, very useful. I know I've found it very inspiring and insightful. So, Julie, thank you so much for coming and joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And thank you to these wonderful moderators. Thank you, Denny.